It always pays to replace your oil pump and pickup when rebuilding your engine. And even though the pickup and the pump are new, we want to dismantle the pump to make sure there's no dirt, dust, or debris inside of either. Also inside, we'll have our main rotor and the idler. The one that's mounted on the shaft is your main pump rotor, and the other one, your idler, is on its own shaft. If you notice that both these gears have a marking, when you reinstall these gears later, make sure both these marks are showing. By taking our scraper and starting at the base of the pump and working our way out, we can break the edge in the rotor bores themselves. Also, we can do the same at the top of the housing where it meets the cover. Take our emery cloth again, 320 or finer, and just wipe over these areas a few times, and you notice a drastic difference in the sharpness of the edge. Scraper. Instead, we'll take our emery cloth, and by rolling it into an edge, we'll move into these areas and just polish the edges lightly. We just want to take the sharp edge off and dull it so that it can't initially score either the roof of the pump or the cover plate. We'll do this on all teeth on both sides of both gears. Once we finish this, we want to thoroughly wash and dry all these pieces to make sure they're free of any dust or debris. You want to chuck the cover in the vise. You don't want to over tighten it, but it must be fairly snug. We're going to install it into this hole, and you notice it'll just barely start in and then bind. At this point, we have to drive it in. When the pickup has been properly installed in the cover, this raised bead on the pickup tube should just about contact the cover. What we want to do is take some of the lube or oil and put a generous portion of it on the idler shaft. Taking the idle gear, we want to put some on both faces and wipe some in between the teeth of the gear. Now we can reinstall the idler gear in the bore, making sure once again that we have our reference mark facing out. We can also turn this gear now inside to spread our lubricant and make sure that we have no binding or interference in this movement. Now this gear can be reinstalled in the housing. And it always pays, once again, as with everything that you reinstall, to turn it and feel for any type of binding or improper action. Taking our pump cover with a pickup installed, we can also put a light coating in these areas where the ends of the rotors will come in contact with the cover. We can now reassemble our cover onto the pump, and it'll only go on but one way because of the bolt pattern. Let's bolt the oil pump in place now. We put it down over the alignment pins. So we're just going to swing it up and exaggerate it. We want it up high. Now we can take our oil pan without a gasket and lay it down over our pump pickup assembly. Of course, the pickup now is keeping the oil pan from moving all the way down to the block. So what we have to do is push down on it until it's seated against the bottom of the block. Now by removing the pan, being careful not to pull up on the pickup, we know that the height of the pickup now from the block, or actually from the bottom of our oil pan, is 0. By taking a scale or a ruler and measuring off any fixed point now in the block assembly, at this point we're using a counterweight. Looking at the edge of the pickup, we want to move the pickup 1/4 inch closer to the block. That's very easily done. Right now we're measuring 3.5 inches, so I'm just going to pat it down till I'm at 3¼ inches. At this point, we've achieved proper clearance between the bottom of the pickup and the bottom of the pan. If you notice how easy it is to move this, it really pays to have the pickup spot welded to the pump housing. This is the shaft that we removed from the old engine. This is also the one we had mentioned we do not want to reuse. This pump shaft uses a nylon bushing such as this to keep the pump shaft and the oil pump in alignment. These are no longer used. We want to discard this assembly and purchase, usually from a speed shop, a one-piece type pump shaft which has a steel collar instead of the plastic one. This will ensure us that we will not arrive at a pump shaft failure in our new engine. We can install our pump drive shaft and our oil pump. We want to slide the pump shaft up onto the pump till it locks in place, holding it up so it doesn't drop. We slide it into the block, align the pump on the rear main, and install our bolt. Before installing the front cover on the block, we first need to install the front crankshaft seal in the front cover. In order to do this, we need 2 wooden blocks. The reason we need 2 wooden blocks is one, to squarely drive the seal into the front cover, the other one to support the front cover so that we don't damage this delicate lip that holds the front oil pan seal. Very simply, the block that we're going to use to support the cover will fit inside here, supporting this entire area where the back of the seal contacts. So by placing a block in this fashion, we'll put our front cover back down on our bench. And if you notice, this front seal has a red coating on the edge. This has already been coated with a sealant. If your front seal is just metal colored, you need to apply an adequate sealer such as high tack or a light bead of silicone around it. By placing the seal squarely into the recess in the cover, making sure that is at same distance above the cover all the way around, press it in as far as you can with your fingers. This will lock it in alignment. Taking another block, and please make sure that these blocks of wood are clean of sawdust and other dirt, lay it on top, take an adequately sized hammer, and strike sharply down. This will install the seal squarely and all the way into the bore without damaging the cover or the seal. We'll need to lubricate the cam button. Then, apply a light coat of grease to the block. Install the gasket. Now, we will apply another coat of grease on the gasket itself. Making sure that we did apply our grease in the front seal, now we can install our front cover. Very easily by aligning it over the dowel pins. It'll hold it in place for us. Before we mount the oil pan, we'll need to apply sealer to these 4 corners. After that, we'll take our grease again and put a light coat on the entire bottom deck of the block where the oil pan gasket will be placed. Now we can install the long gaskets in their proper places, noting that we put the end of the gasket over the area where the sealer was and pressed it into place. Now we're going to go back into our 4 corners by the front cover and rear main area and apply another dab of sealer in these areas. Once we've completed that, we can install our rubber gaskets in both ends. making sure that they also press down into the sealer where they meet the long gaskets. After that's accomplished, we can now coat the top of the oil pan side gaskets with a light film of grease, working it over the pickup and guiding it down into place. We'll notice that it doesn't fit all the way down and contact the block. That's because to contact the block, we first have to compress these end gaskets by drawing them down with the bolts. We usually start out with the 4 corner bolts, which are a larger bolt than the remaining intermediate bolts. Now that we've started all of our oil pan bolts, we just want to go along and gradually get light tension on all the bolts. We want to take particular attention to the area of the gasket between the pan and the gasket and the block, and the gasket itself. As we continue pressure with the bolt, we'll first see that the grease starts to come out between the gasket and the pan and the block. Shortly after that, we'll actually watch the gasket start to swell out from between the pan and the block. At that point, we have achieved adequate tension in this area. If you recall, when we disassembled our engine, the mount was placed in this position with the relief valve toward the inside of the block. We don't want to reinstall it this way. In this area of the recess is our main oil passage. Oil has to be drawn up into this area to fill the oil filter. This check valve area can restrict that flow. To remedy this and improve our oiling system, we simply rotate this piece 180 degrees, therefore relieving the inlet area. Also, we mentioned that there were special bolts used in retaining this piece. These bolts, and only these bolts, should be used to reassemble it. These bolts